Hi, thank you so much for joining me again. My name is Paddy Venner. I'm a life coach practicing out of the UK. Talk I want to do today, I've called it the Michael Jackson factor. This is quite a hot, contentious issue because recently HBO released some documentaries in two parts that were screened here in the UK in various parts of the world, where it's a full expose of two young men that have stepped forward and claimed that Michael Jackson had abused them, and they go into great detail of the abuse. And of course the backlash of that is the people saying they're telling the truth, and an equal number of people saying they're not telling the truth. And I've had some people saying, well, that's it, I'm throwing all my Michael Jackson records and albums and CDs away and deleting all the downloads. And I find it very interesting how we respond to these sort of things as people. Now, I'm not entering into any judgment on it. I'm not going into the details that were shared. That's not the point of this. I'm not even going to venture an opinion as to whether I believe them or not. That's not what it's about. What this is about is, I wonder how hypocritical we can be as people sometimes. And very often it's very comfortable and very easy for us when we see a public figure that has fallen and who's fallen into some sort of immorality, some sort of crime. They've been found out doing something. And it's almost like we use them as a lightning rod because it's comfortable. It takes the attention off our own lives for a moment and our own failings, even though our failings might not be anywhere as near or as great as that certain public figure. But we've all got stuff. We've all got some brokenness. We've all got some issue in our lives. We're all slightly broken. And it sort of comforts us when we see somebody else in the headlines and we can sort of point our finger at them and say, wow, look at them. And I say, yeah, but what about us? But at the same time, are we consistent in our judgments of people? We're using that person as a lightning rod. A lightning rod will be something you put outside your house or even on a vehicle, and that attracts the lightning bolt so that it doesn't hit the house. That's your lightning rod. And we set up these things as lightning rods, and we strike at those so that the strike doesn't hit home with us. And I remember getting very angry some years ago when I heard that R&B singer Rihanna had been beaten up by her boyfriend. And I'm not going into ins and outs of all of that, but I was very angry with him. I hate any form of domestic abuse, domestic violence, violence against women. I just can't get my head around that. You know, a real man would never raise his hand to a woman. Males do it, but men don't. And there's a difference between a man and a male, but that's for another talk. And I remember looking at this and saying, well, you know, absolutely, I never liked his music anyway, but even more so now. I'll have nothing to do with the person. I will never listen to anything that he does. And he's actually been banned from touring in the UK because of what he did. But then I had to look at one of the singers that I do listen to and found that he'd actually been arrested for exactly the same offense. He'd done the same thing to his partner, but I was so reluctant to get rid of his stuff because I love his music. Then some people will say, oh, you know, all these rock musicians and heavy metal guys, they're into such debauched lifestyles, when in actual fact some of them aren't. But then we'll look at it and say, well, why can't we just listen to the classical music, the music of the past? And the reality is a lot of the classical composers were actually as debauched as modern day rock stars, and into drugs and licentious living and all that sort of stuff. And we don't throw their albums out, but we'll throw out the ones we don't approve of that are around now. We need to be consistent. We need to be careful that we're not being a judgmental people. And we need to be, as I say, consistent in our judgment. And we need to look at ourselves first. Before we throw stones at somebody else, look at our own lives and say, is there something that I need to address in myself? Is there something that, am I being inconsistent in this? Let's not just use public figures as lightning rods. Let's examine our own hearts first up. And let's make sure that whatever we've got to say it in the living years. Don't wait till somebody's dead before you start hurling the stones. How would you like to be spoken about after your death? I suppose it's got a lot to do with how we lived our lives before we died. But what I'm getting at here is, you know what, let's be consistent with our judgments of things, and let's be very careful, because every time you point a finger at somebody, you've got 3 fingers pointing back at yourself. And I've had to self-evaluate and look at myself so many times to make sure that what I'm saying is accurate, it's kind, is it necessary, and I just find it very helpful. Just a few thoughts, and we'll chat again soon.